But I want to finish up the podcast by talking about another factor that I also believe is helping to power the stock market higher. And this is the idea that student loans are going to be forgiven. In fact, there was an article that came out yesterday. Chuck Schumer basically said that on day one, President Biden should just by executive order, forget about Congress, we don't need Congress, just with the stroke of a pen, let's just wipe out $50,000 worth of student loans for every student that has debt or every American that has debt, right? Just do that. Now, I don't know if this is going to happen or not. I do think that there's going to be a lot of pressure on Biden for student loan forgiveness. And obviously, that is a huge carrot to wave in front of constituents, right? That you're going to forgive their loans. I mean, you're really buying votes. You're just handing out a lot of money to a voting class. And so there's going to be a lot of pressure. This is certainly one of the issues that the far left is very much in favor of, led by, AOC and the squad and, Bernie Sanders. Everybody wants to forgive student debt. And of course, the irony that is lost on all these liberals is that the reason that students have all this debt is because of the government. If it wasn't for the government, students never would have been able to borrow money because the lenders wouldn't have made the loans. It's only the government guarantees that enable the loan. So it's because of the government that all these young kids took on all this debt to buy overpriced degrees. And of course, eventually under Barack Obama, the government basically started to make the loans directly. They cut out the middleman. They no longer guaranteed the loans. They just started making the loans. And again, it's similar to the Federal Reserve buying bonds. The U.S. government doesn't give a damn if the borrowers can pay back the money because it's not their money. They're just trying to buy votes. They're just trying to help the educational establishment overcharge the students. So the government starts loaning all this money out without any regard to the ability of the borrowers to repay. And the reason that all these people have these massive debts is because of government. It's all this well-intentioned socialists that caused the problem. And now they're, this is a terrible problem. And, the solution is just to forgive the debt, right? Which, of course, is not a solution. That's actually another problem. Because the minute you start forgiving the debt, well, now you create a massive moral hazard. I mean, what would happen if $50,000 worth of student loans were forgiven? Can you imagine the impact that would have? I mean, colleges would be like, oh my God, this is Christmas. Because now we can really raise tuition because our students are going to know that it doesn't matter if they have to borrow all this extra money to pay even more tuition because they're not going to have to pay it back. It's just the loan's just going to be forgiven. And of course, the students are not as concerned about taking on all the extra debt because they know it's going to get forgiven. I mean, it's not going to be a one-time thing. If they do it once, they're going to do it again. Everyone's going to expect it. And in fact, up until now, there were people that didn't want to take on debt. There were parents that used to save for their children's education. They're going to feel like suckers. You busted your butt, you worked hard and saved money to put your kid through college, and now you should have just let them borrow the money, and you could have spent that money yourself because the loan is just being forgiven. So the moral hazard there is in the future, no one's going to pay for college. Nobody's going to work to try to avoid going into debt because you're an idiot. Take on the debt. It's going to be forgiven. So this is just going to be a massive moral hazard if this actually happens, that is just going to exacerbate the problem that the government created by interfering in the college education. So it's just going to mean that degrees are going to become even more and more expensive and a bigger drag on the economy. And of course, the legality of this, I don't think it's legal, but I mean, that never stops the government from getting away from stuff. But what I want to talk about is the issue that no one talks about, nor will anyone talk about but me, and that is the inflationary aspects of student loan forgiveness. This is another massive monetary stimulus, which is helping to drive the market higher because forgiving student loans, right? And they're talking about $50,000, at least that's what Schumer talked about. Now, I don't even know how that would work. I mean, it would be terrible if they just forgave up to $50,000 worth of loans for everybody. That would mean someone that took out $50,000 worth of loans, he gets his entire thing wiped out. Someone who took out $30,000 is going to feel like a schmuck for not borrowing more. I mean, maybe if they say we'll forgive half of what you borrowed up to 50,000, I don't know, that maybe that wouldn't be as bad a moral hazard. I mean, it's bad no matter how they do it. There's no good way to do it. Although the only way that they could do this in a good way is if they say no more student loans, right? We admit that it's our fault. We caused the problem. So we're going to forgive the student loans that exist. But in the future, no more student loans, no more government guaranteed student loans, no more government made student loans. You want to borrow money as a student, you convince a bank to loan it to you, right? Good luck in the market, right? Now colleges, you better cut your costs because that's the only way you're going to have prices low enough for anybody to afford. But that ain't going to happen, right? So, they're not going to do it the correct way. And of course, the other correct way would be to pay for it, to raise taxes or cut other government spending to finance this instead of paying for it through inflation, which is what they're going to do. Because forgiving student loans, let's say they forgive $1 trillion worth of student loans, right? Just pick a number. I think there's like 1.7, 1.8 trillion. It's getting close to 2 trillion. But let's say they forgive $1 trillion worth of student loans. That's like printing $1 trillion and just dropping it from helicopters. That it's pure inflation. Now, a lot of people, because I tweeted this out, and one of the reasons I'm talking about it now, because there was a lot of confusion. Because people were thinking, well, why is this inflationary? Because, debt is being defaulted on, so debt's going away, or the asset is going away because somebody's liability is somebody else's asset. So why is this inflationary, or why isn't it deflationary? Under normal circumstances, it would be true that if a loan was forgiven or defaulted, the gain to the borrower would be a loss to the lender, right? Because now the borrower doesn't pay back what he owes, but the lender doesn't get paid what he was owed. And so that lender loses money. His loss is the borrower's gain, right? So that is an inflationary outcome because the extra money that the borrower now has to spend because he doesn't have the debt to repay is now money that the lender can no longer spend because he loaned out money and he's not going to get it back. This is a completely different story when it comes to government student loans. Now, there's two types of loans that would be forgiven. One is where the U.S. government guaranteed a private loan, right? So some bank made a loan to a student and now the student owes the bank. But the government guaranteed the loan. So if the U.S. government tells the student, you don't have to repay your loan, the lender doesn't lose anything because now the U.S. government has to pay the bank instead of the student. So the student gets his debts wiped out. So now he has money to spend in the economy that he was going to give to the bank. Right now he could take that money and buy more consumer goods because he doesn't have to pay his loan. But the lender is no worse off. The lender's still going to get his money back. Where's that money coming from? Well, the Fed's going to print it because the government is running a deficit. They're not going to raise taxes or cut other spending to make these payments to the banks. So the Fed is going to print more money. And now the government's going to give that money to the banks instead of the students giving the money or the former students giving the money. Some of these former students are almost retired. In fact, there are people who have actually retired who are on Social Security that are still making loan payments. But this is pure inflation because there are no losers. The borrower doesn't have to repay his loan, but the lender gets paid. He just gets paid by the government. So the money supply expands by that extra money because now both the lender and the borrower have the money. The other way these loans came into existence is if the government made the loan directly. There is no bank. The government loaned money to an individual. The individual is supposed to return that money to the government. So even if the Federal Reserve printed the money to enable the loan in the first place, when the student graduates and repays the loan, that money comes out of circulation. So it's not a permanent expansion of the money supply. It's just temporary until the loan gets repaid. But if the U.S. government says, hey, you students, you don't have to pay back the money that we created and loaned you. That money can stay out in circulation. It never has to be returned to the U.S. government. Again, that's pure inflation. The government made loans and the loans are never paid back. So it's like it just printed money and gave it to the students. It didn't loan money to the students. The Fed ran up a bunch of money and they gave it to the students to pay for college. So this is the same thing as QE. It's just massive inflation. It is a huge QE program for students.